The laws of Hotza'ah. Melacha of Hotza'ah consists of transporting an object from a private domain to a public domain, or vice versa. Or transporting an object more than 4 amot in a public domain. During the 6 weekdays, man's role is to perform melachot in order to improve and develop the world, to craft tools and instruments, build houses, and cultivate crops for food and textiles. The highest purpose of each and every melacha is to build the Mishkan and Mikdash, in which God's presence can dwell. Despite the tremendous value of work, the Torah commands us to refrain from all melacha on Shabbat in order to explore the foundations of faith and to study Torah. This way, the work that we do all week is imbued with deeper significance. It has the power to bring the world closer to perfection and establish within it a mikdash for the Lord, God of Israel. The novelty of Hotza'ah is that an act that does not physically alter an object can still be considered a melacha. Even changing its location in some substantive way is considered a melacha. Location is thus of paramount importance. There's nothing in the world that does not have a location, place. When an item is in its place, it has a purpose. When it is not, it is unimportant. For example, in a place with no water, water is very valuable. While in a place with plenty of water, its value declines. Furthermore, nothing can exist without a place to be. This explains why God is referred to as Machon, place, because he ensures the world continued existence, provides a place for it to be. Thank you, sir. When the sages discussed each type of place, they used the word reshut, property, authority, or domain, since every object exists by the authority of the place where it rests. We find in the Torah that the donations for the Mishkan were collected from each individual's private domain and were brought to the public domain where the Mishkan was built. This was considered a melacha, as the verse states explicitly. Moshe then ordered that the proclamation be made throughout the encampment that no man or woman make further effort on behalf of the donations for the sanctuary, and the people stopped bringing. So we see that bringing is associated with melacha explicitly in the text. And it's strange that the Tosfot calls, out of the 39 categories of work, the category called Hotza'ah, the one we're discussing now, taking things in or out, he calls it the weakest, melacha gru'ah. It's an inferior melacha. It's inferior because you're not actually doing anything physical in the object. You're not planting a seed. You're not moving, grinding something large into something small. You're not really changing anything except for the place. And we can all appreciate how important place is. As he said, we know what was like to be the Jewish people without our country. And now we feel so different that we're in our country, we're in our place. And you feel out of place. So that's just in terms of feelings. But the Torah seems to be guiding us, to instructing us that there is significance to the transportation from one place to another place, from one domain to another domain. That is called a melacha, and it's prohibited on Shabbat. So even though we're not actually cooking the egg, you're just moving the raw egg from one place to another place. If it doesn't follow the rules, if you're actually taking it out or in from the halachically defined spaces, it's a prohibition. It's prohibited from the Torah. It's one of the 39 categories of work. So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn some of those laws of Hotza'ah. Now, we sort of left it for the end, number one, because it's in the list, it's the last one usually. But also it's called an inferior melacha, because it's sort of less intuitive than the others. The other one's, okay, you're writing something, you see the writing, so you know the result. But here, it's harder to define. And also because, to tell you the truth, I'll give you the bottom line before we get started. In most Jewish communities, you don't have to worry about this malacha because we have a workaround. Eruv, that's correct. What we call today an Eruv is a surrounding perimeter fence, a form of a perimeter fence, which halachically is significant, and that makes all of the city or the neighborhood or the town, wherever the Jews live, they make sure there's a perimeter fence, and then it's all considered to be one enclosure. It's all one private domain. So you can take things out of your house, you won't be taking them out of the private domain. It's all considered from private domain to private domain because we're all enclosed in a gated community, sort of. And so that's why many people, even if they're religious Jews living in a religious community and they grow up keeping Shabbat, they don't really know the laws of Hotza'ah too well because it's not practical. Some cities, in some communities, like in Sweden, in Stockholm, they don't have an Eruv. And there's some European countries where there's arguments about it. We'll talk about it why. But if you are in a place where you're outside of a regular Jewish community, you find yourself visiting somewhere or traveling somewhere, you have to know these laws. You have to know how to carry or how not to carry on Shabbat. So, with that introduction, a little bit of the meaning of how important it is to be in place and not to violate the Shabbat by doing this kind of work either. We'll get started, get into the thick of things. Okay? Let me start with a picture. Here, you take this, put it in your bag. And here they have a very nice picture regarding Hotza'ah. It's a little town. Opa, did I do something? No. And basically we have a person inside a house and outside a house giving a loaf of bread. That's the way Masechet Shabbat starts. But we have all sorts of situations we have to learn. There's a courtyard here. There's houses. There's people carrying things inside the public thoroughfare, walking down the street carrying something. Originally, we even saw a picture of someone who was trying to avoid carrying by carrying on his leg. Remember that guy was balancing on an apple on his I don't know where it is here on this page, but that's because he was trying to avoid carrying. Anyways, we're going to get into all sorts of different definitions. The classic distinction is that there are 4 types of spaces when it comes to the laws of Hotza'ah. You can see in Hebrew it says over here, Reshut HaYachid. Reshut HaYachid means a private domain inside a house or a courtyard that has 4 walls. That's for sure a Reshut HaYachid. The opposite of Reshut HaYachid is a public space, Reshut HaRabim. That's the thoroughfare where everybody goes. It's not bounded by any walls. We'll see some more definitions of that later. But those are the 2 basic ones. And then there's 2, those are the biblical domains, biblically defined. And then there's 2 which the rabbis added. The rabbis said, well, there's something in between. Not quite, doesn't fit to be Reshut HaRabim, and it's not Reshut HaYachid. But still the rabbi said it's too similar to Reshut HaRabim, and therefore it's rabbinically prohibited to carry there. And that's one is called Carmelit. Carmelit, like the ocean. You're not allowed to carry things in an ocean. You're on a boat or something. You're not allowed to transport anything in a boat from point A to point B. That's like carrying it, even though it's not really a public thoroughfare. But rabbinically it's prohibited. And that language of Carmelit is a little bit hard to figure out the etymology. Carmel, what does that mean?
It's a port in Haifa.
It's a port of Haifa, it's a name, right? Carmel is also the name of sort of half-ripe, soft grains. I guess that's why they call it a Carmelit, because it's sort of half-baked Rishut HaRabim. It's not fully full Rishut HaRabim, but it's sort of like an unripe Rishut HaRabim. That's Carmelit. And the last, that's number three, that's rabbinic. And the last type of domain or space regarding the laws of Shabbat appears here in a little small picture. It looks like a little pillar. It's like a stand, which is very small. It's less than 4 by 4 amot, so it's about 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters, and it's lower than 10 tfachim. It's called Makom Ptur. That's the fourth domain. It's called the Makom Ptur, and it means it's a space which is absolved. You're allowed to carry from a Reshut HaYachid, like this fellow. He knows he wants to take something out of the house or the yard, but he's not allowed to usually. But if he takes it out and he places onto a Makom Ptur, that's allowed. And then from a Makom Ptur, somebody else can come and pick it up and transport it into the Reshut HaRabim. In cases where you're stuck without an Eruv outside, there's all sorts of fancy tricks you can do, like this one, using a Makom Ptur. Just last night I was discussing it with my son, who found himself outside, lying in the trenches in an avocado orchard grove for a week, including Shabbat, trying to protect us on the northern border. So there are places you'll find yourself on Shabbat, and obviously in times of war, there's leniencies. But these fellows, with their Talmudic minds and training, they were trying to think of all sorts of solutions for not carrying in the public domain. Fine, it's not a public domain, it's only a Carmelit. Clearly, an avocado grove is not a public domain, but it's not a private domain either. And so, rabbinically, you're not allowed to carry. So if you arrange some kind of a Makom Ptur, carry from here to there, there's other solutions, we'll get to it. But these are the four categories. The four categories are Reshut HaRabim, Reshut HaYachid, Carmelit, and Makom Ptur. So far, so good? Okay. So the classic definition of the minimal height for a wall we said 4 walls for Reshut HaYachid is 10 tfachim. Tefach is 8 centimeters, so 80 centimeters, right? 10 tfachim. Also deep, by the way. If you have a pit, if you have a trench, which is 10 tfachim deep, as long as it's big enough, the width and the depth is 4 tfachim. It's about 30 centimeters. 8 times 4, 32, so about 32 centimeters. By 32 centimeters, if you have a pit or some kind of a trench which is that deep, 10 tfachim deep, 80 centimeters deep, and it's wide enough, it becomes a Reshut HaYachid. So the trench itself could be a private domain. What's a Reshut HaRabim? As it sounds like, streets, squares, markets. Now the trick is, I said, why is not every street a Reshut HaRabim? There is a condition. We learn out these laws and the definitions from the time the Jewish people were traveling in the desert. We have a tradition that in the desert, it says in the Torah, that they had these wagons to carry the heavy beams for the Mishkan. And the wagons were side by side, and we know how big they were, and how big the beams were, and how many were carried on each wagon. We work it out. The minimum size for a thoroughfare, for a Reshut HaRabim, is to be 16 amot wide. An amah, 48 centimeters, or 50, let's say. So 6 times 50. So that's, 3.5 meters. 3.5 meters wide. Well, there's some streets which are not 3.5 meters wide. For sure in the old city, you have very narrow streets, right? And some streets are 16 amot. Well, amah is, amah's around 50 centimeters. Yeah, so it's got to be very wide. Not all the streets are that wide, so they're not all Reshut HaRabim, biblically. What are they if they're not Reshut HaRabim and they're not Reshut HaYachid? Who remembers? Hmm? Carmelit. If it's not Reshut Harabim, not Reshut Hilchos, it's Carmelit. Komptur, very few come a Komptur. It's only if it's very small area. This little pillar type of thing is a Makom Ptur. So Carmelit. So most of the streets around us are Carmelit. Also, there's another condition. This is brought in Rashi. Not everybody agrees with it, but we rely on this many times. Is that we figure out in the times of when the Jewish people were in the desert coming out of Egypt, and when these laws of Shabbat were first implemented, there were 600,000 Jews who traversed the road every day. This was a condition. It's not called a Reshut Harabim from the Torah unless it's a thoroughfare which is traveled by 600,000 people. So in Tekoa, there's only 1,000 families. There's not ever going to be 600,000 people. Even though our streets can be very wide, they're not wide enough. They may be very wide. There are not enough people there to create a biblical Reshut Harabim. So even if you have no Eruv, the worst it can get to is a rabbinic prohibition. You're not allowed to carry outside in the Carmelit either. So if we say there's a condition that you have to have 600,000 Jews traversing every day, so then that really saves you from a lot of problems with the laws of Shabbat, except in big cities. I'm not even going to talk about Delhi or New York. For sure there's 600,000 people going down the big thoroughfare. But even in smaller towns, you could, if there's 1 million residents, you could have a nice big thoroughfare in the middle. It could be Reshut Harabim D'Oraita. So most of the modern cities, you have an issue that maybe it's a Reshut Harabim from the Torah, and if you do, then you're not allowed to carry anything from point A to point B. 4 amot. 4 amot on a maz, we said around 50 centimeters, 48, so 2 meters. You're not allowed to carry an object from point A, 2 meters away to point B, and to pick it up and place it down. So far, so good. Questions, yes?
Carmelit, what is that mean?
It's a halachic name of a place that is defined as a public thoroughfare on the rabbinic level. It's not a biblically defined public area. If it was from the Torah defined as a public thoroughfare, you would be not allowed to carry there on Shabbat from the Torah. But if it's a Carmelit, you're only not allowed to carry there from the rabbis on the rabbinic level. It's a lower level prohibition. The truth is, it's confusing because I believe that there is a cable car in Haifa which they call the Carmelit, because it's the Carmel Mountain.
Underground railway.
The Carmelit's the underground railway? So what's the cable car called? It's not called the Carmelit? Oh, my mistake.
There's 2 cable cars.
There are 2 now. Okay, I haven't been in a while. Wow.
Led them in France to the University of Menachem.
Amazing. Wonderful. But anyways, that's a confusing name because in rabbinic literature it means something else. It means a public thoroughfare, rabbinically.
Is it not a name for children? Or for
Carmel, many children are called Carmel. It's a pretty name, yeah. It's the name of a region in Israel, near Haifa.
And a mountain something?
Mountain, yeah, Mount Carmel, yeah, exactly. Yeah, what happened on Mount Carmel? Who knows their Tanakh? Eliyahu Navi, what did he do there?
Sacrifice to
Killed a lot of priests of Baal.
Right, he had a head-to-head confrontation against the Baal, worshippers of Avodah Zarah, the Baal. That's where Eliyahu. Mount Carmel. Carmel Mountain. So it's the name of a mountain. It's the name of a railroad, and it's the name of a halachic thoroughfare.
It's close to Beit Shemesh or something?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think there's a place. Oh, there is in the south of Hebron. There is a town called Carmel. is another place. Besides the mountain region near Haifa and the Mount Carmel near Haifa, there's a town in Drom Har Hebron, which is not far from Beit Shemesh. So maybe that's what you're thinking of. There is a town called Carmel in the southern region. Yeah, okay. I believe there is in Los Angeles or California. Is there not Carmel, the name of a place in California? Carmel, California. Just like there's Jerusalem in all of the south, no? Lots of little towns called Jerusalem and Carmel. They're named after the biblical cities of Israel. Hananel, how are you this morning? You're fine, good. Okay, great. Good to see you. We're learning, Stephen also, good morning. How are you? Okay. We're learning the laws of Shabbat, of course, and we're learning the laws of Hotza'ah. It's chapter 21 in our books, Pninei Halacha. And we started off with saying that it's a strange malacha that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbat, in or out, from a private or to a public domain, or the opposite. And we just defined what are the private domains and what are the public domains on the biblical level, and rabbinically the strictures which the rabbis added. Okay, let's continue a little bit. And let's go to the. I want to make sure that. That you understand that there's two parts to the Melacha of Hotza'ah. One is in or out, right? That's one part. And the other part is when you're out, when you're in the public area, you're not allowed to carry from point A to point B, 4 amot. That's 2 meters. To carry within the public domain, that's the second part. Ha'avara. That's to carry. That's usually what we say in English. We actually refer to this malacha. In Hebrew, it's hotza'ah, which means taking out. But in English, we use the word carrying, which is for the second part B, which is within the public domain, you're not allowed to carry. So there's two parts, okay? Now, if you look at page 110, please. At the bottom, it says that Malacha v'Hotza'ah is 3 stages. That's in section 5. The Malacha has 3 stages. In order for it to actually, right, we said, when you write, obviously, there's a definition. You take a pen and you write a few letters. There's a definition of how much is considered to be writing. To do Hotza'ah, since it's not really an activity like building or plowing, we know what plowing is. So you're not allowed to plow. But you might, here, we have to really define what is the malacha, because it's not usually called an act of work. You're not changing anything in the object. So the halachically, it's defined by 3 parts. Picking up the object. You see on the bottom, page 110? Picking up the object in one domain. Transporting it to a different domain. Akira, ha'avara, and putting it down in that domain, hanacha. Okay? Even if one accomplishes, on the top of page 111 now, even if one accomplishes all 3 with one action, for example, by throwing an object from Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaRabim, or throwing it 4 amot within Reshut HaRabim, he has violated Hotza'ah. Similarly, if one is holding an object, or has one in his pocket, you're not even holding it, it's in your pocket, and you walk with it in your pocket from Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaRabim, you violate Hotza'ah. Why? Because when one begins to walk, he uproots the object. That's lifting it up. But when he walks from one domain to the other, he transports it. That's the Havara, to a different domain. And when he stops in the second domain, he is putting it down. Now, sometimes, do you ever have something in your pocket and you forgot it was there? Did that ever happen to you? Of course, it happens all the time. So once my father-in-law lived in New York And he lived right near Rav Moshe Feinstein, one of the greatest poskim. And my father-in-law himself was a rabbi and a Talmud scholar. And he realized that he left the house with something in his pocket on Shabbat. Now he learned the halacha. He knows, actually, that in order to violate the Torah law, you have to have all three elements. Akira, lifting it up, transporting it, ha'avara, and hanacha, placing it down. So if he were to stop in one place, halachically that's considered to be as if you placed it down. So there's a solution. If you realize you have something in your pocket, keep walking. You never stop. It's not considered to be that you've placed it down. So he didn't know what to do. The Talmud discusses this solution. So he went to ask Rav Moshe Feinstein. But he doesn't want to stop, because then at that moment that he stops, he'll be completing the act of Hachnasa. He brought something in his pocket from outside the public domain into the house, into the shul where he saw the rabbi. So he started to ask the rabbi the question, but he was walking while he was asking the question. He kept on walking and he's trying to speak to Rav Moshe Feinstein and walking around him while he's asking the question. And Rav Moshe was getting annoyed. He says, "Why you keep walking? I can't understand what you're saying. Can't understand the question." So he said, "Stand in one place and ask your question like a normal human being." So he did. The rabbi told him, he stopped. He asked him his question. He told him what happened. I had something in my pocket. I brought it inside. And now I'm worried that if I put it down, if I stop, I'll be putting it down. And Rav Moshe said, "You should have kept on walking."
But he commanded to stop.
Of course, I know. But the bottom line is, once it's done, it's done. It's a funny story, a true story from my father-in-law, a blessed memory. So, halachically thinking, there's the beginning and an end. There's a complete action only when you have all three items. Also, this is what my son was saying, that when they were outside on Shabbat, outside without an Eruv, and they had to pick up the garbage where they were, they had to leave. So all the Talmud scholars that they arranged that everybody would carry a little bit less than 3 amot. And they made like a conveyor belt. They gave it to each other. Each one carried it 3 amot, not 4. Just under 4 amot, and then they handed it off to someone else. And then he carried it another less than 4 amot, and then he carried it, and so nobody actually completed the act of carrying 4 amot. Again, as I said, there's all sorts of tricks you can play to try to minimize the prohibition. Like I said, it was only a rabbinic prohibition in any case. And of course, it's a time of war. A time of war, you have to do what you have to do to in the best way possible. So, but it's beautiful that they were thinking of the laws of Shabbat when they're putting their lives at risk to save us, to protect us, to stave off the Hezbollah. Okay, if you look at the bottom of page 111, it's important to be aware. The last paragraph, it says, according to Torah law, the prohibition on hotza'ah applies only when it's performed in the usual fashion. Right, I mentioned it to you before. For example, if one takes an item in his hand, slips it in his pocket, or puts it in his backpack, he's carrying normally, and is thus transgressing Torah law. In contrast, if he uses a shinui, what's a shinui mean?
Indirect.
No, change. Such as carrying a handkerchief. You're thinking grama. Right, grama is indirect. Shinui is a change. It's not in the normal fashion. It's just as carrying a handkerchief in his shoe. Who puts a handkerchief in their shoe? Nobody, right? So that's a strange way to carry it. So if you're out somewhere and you need your handkerchief and you don't want to carry, so you carried it out. Or what another trick my son said, he took one of his magazines and he put it behind on top of his backpack or something like that. Or he put something that he needed in his helmet. You don't carry things in your hat usually. So that's a shinui. He was trying to do something. as much as he could to not violate on the Torah level, or to bring it down one level, even from the rabbinic level, it becomes too rabbinic, doubly rabbinic, so that could be allowed. Anyways, in sum, next paragraph, page 112. The Torah prohibition of hotza'ah is limited to the performance of an entire malacha by one individual in the way that it is normally done during the week. Additionally, the sages prohibited any action that causes the same result as the malacha, even if it's done with a shinui or undertaken by more than one person. If the goal is accomplished, transferring the item to the desired place, the action is prohibited. But and it's important to note that even in a Carmelite, the sages prohibited carrying an item with a shinui by more than one person. These tricks are only useful for the case of great need. It's not something that we can, just say, oh, who needs an eruv? We can always just carry it in an abnormal way. That's still prohibited. It's only a solution if you have a great need. Okay? Yes, Hananel.
For example, when someone had a bar mitzvah, and then we have to carry far away from them on that Shabbat.
Yeah.
What should we do?
Right, so it's a very good question. We always, in many cases, even if it's not a bar mitzvah, you want to bring your siddur that you're used to with your translation or whatever to the synagogue. You want to bring your talit from out of your house into the street. That's one prohibition. And then from the street into the synagogue, that's a second prohibition. And the third prohibition is in the street, you're going from point A to point B. There's 3 prohibitions of hotza'ah, just walking to shul with your talit. So what do? I said earlier, in most Jewish communities, they have a solution called an eruv, where they enclose the entire neighborhood so that it's all considered to be one domain, private domain, and you're allowed to carry in it. But if you don't, if you're in a town that didn't make an eruv, like Stockholm, you're not allowed to bring the talit. You're not allowed to bring the siddur. You know why? That's in Stockholm. They have many talitot in the shul, community funded, so that everybody doesn't wear their own talit on Shabbat. They wear the community's talit. They don't have to carry their own. And there's, of course, many siddurim, so you don't have to bring your own. Hopefully they have one of the flavor you like. Yeah?
Okay. About one question again. For example, I live the apartment in the highest floor.
Yeah?
And then to bring down the chair,
Yeah.
it's counted a mode, right?
So it shouldn't be a problem because it's all within the apartment, within the house. Everything within the house is considered to be a private domain. We're going to see that there actually are strictures from carrying from one private domain to another private domain, but we have a solution for that too. We'll get to that soon. But the bottom line is if you're within an enclosed area, you can carry even a chair or a couch or something heavy. You might think, oh, it's a lot of work, I'm going to have to sweat. That's not defined as one of the 39 categories of work. The Ramban, we mentioned that in the first day, the Ramban says that anything that's going to void your relaxation and rest on Shabbat could be prohibited by the general positive commandment of Shabbaton, that we're supposed to rest. But it is much less defined. It's not really defined by the halacha clearly. And if it's for the sake of Shabbat, you need an extra chair, you need some place to sit. As long as it's within a private domain, you're allowed to carry it from one place to the other. Okay?
What about the stairs,
The stairs?
We count as an amount, or we don't count?
To create a private domain, we need walls, enclosure. If it's enclosed, even by the yard, has a fence around it, that's good enough. It's all considered to be inside if it's inside walls. Okay, I don't care if it's 1 floor, 2 floors, or 100 floors. If you have a yard enclosing it, halachically, the walls of the fence go up to the heavens, all the way up, 100 floors up. So if you have walls of a building, also, they go up all the way, even if the walls don't. Halachically, it's considered to be separated into a private space. Okay, let's see the most tricky issue which Rabbi Melamed deals with is this issue of an eruv in modern cities. Modern cities have a lot of people, more than 600,000 people. So this trick that, where does he discuss the trick of creating an eruv? Yeah. No, that's a different type of eruv. Let me actually clarify that. I just see where he discusses this idea. Yeah, here, page 115. Okay, let's look at page 115, and then I'll explain it a little bit. Okay, so Yosef, why don't you read for us? Okay. Reshut Rabim, section 8. That's chapter 21, section 8, on page 115.
Reshut Rabim as defined by Torah law, the most pressing particular practical question when dealing with issues of Hotza'ah on Shabbat is whether streets in cities and towns are considered a Reshut Harabim or Carmelit. If streets today are considered a Reshut Harabim, then it is very difficult to do what is necessary to transform them into a Reshut HaYachid. This transformation involves surrounding the entire city with a fence, installing doors in every entranceway, and ensuring that they are all closed at night. Barring this, it would be prohibited to carry in our cities and towns. In contrast, if streets today are defined as Carmeli, example, only rabbinically are they treated as Reshut Harbin, then it is relatively easy to transform them into Reshut HaYachid, where carrying would be permitted. This transformation involves surrounding the city with Tzurat HaPetach halachic doorway, erecting poles and extending strings between them to form a sort of doorway between every pole.
Okay, so what we today call an eruv is not really, we should not be using the term eruv. You're going to see later on, the last chapter talks, chapter 29, talks about eruvin of various types. The one that you most usually refer to as an eruv really shouldn't even be called an eruv. It should be called a tzurat hapetach, because around an entire city or a neighborhood, usually we don't have the opportunity to create a proper wall or a fence. A small community can be a gated community, but mostly the trick we use, and it's much cheaper, is to just put up the frame of a door. Now you're supposed to have a wall. Now a wall like this, is this a wall? Is this an enclosed wall of the room? You see it's an enclosed wall, but there's a door in there. So the door is part of the wall. So even though the doorway is open, it's still considered to be closed. The wall is considered to be a proper wall, even though there's a doorway in it. And so, now do you have to have the door that actually opens and shuts? The fact that you have this two posts, doorway, where you have one post on this side, another post on this side, and then you have something connecting them in the middle, that's a doorway. That's the frame, tzurat, the form, hapetach, the form of a doorway. That's enough to make it considered to be part of the larger wall. Okay, you have a large wall here, and the doorway itself is part of that wall. It's considered to be closed, even though it's open. So then they thought, well, we need to make a nice big wall around the entire city, but we can't. So you know what? Let's make a doorway, and then we'll make another doorway, and then we'll make another doorway, and then we'll make another doorway. A frame of a door, a frame of a door, a frame of a door. It's much cheaper to put up two posts and something on top, and the lintel on top actually can even be as thin as a string. So really all you need are posts you know what? Let's just make one big doorway. We'll take one post here, and a string in between them. We got ourselves a nice big doorway, which is considered to be a wall, halachically. So this is the way what we call an eruv is made. Obviously, if you make it too wide, then it can sag. the string is going to sag. So we try to, put up more posts in the middle, anyways. But the idea is, I've built many eruvim in my lifetime. It's not that complicated, but there are some rules, some laws that you have to understand. But the bottom line is the way we turn a town into a Reshut HaYachid, which allows you to carry inside of it, is by not putting up a full wall, usually. Usually we put up the doorways, frames of a doorway with posts and string. That trick is what allows everybody to carry inside all the major cities. The only problem is that halachic trick is only good enough to allow a rabbinic territory called a Carmelite that can turn a Carmelite into Reshut HaYachid with that trick. But if it's actual Reshut HaRabim from the Torah, 600,000 people, 16 amot wide, then you actually need a gate, you need the doorways. Some cities, they actually have the opportunity, and they actually do have, they close up all the entrances to the city at nighttime. And then you have a way to allow carrying within a big city too. But when you have a big city and you think you're going to solve the problem by Tzurat HaPetach, it's a problem. That's what this discussion is about. He says there's a debate whether or not our cities today, which have more than 600,000 people, can you even make an eruv? Can you make this type of eruv? Tzurat HaPetach, the frame of a door. Is that good enough? So he debates, and the next page has a long discussion. The bottom line is that he goes, and after this long discussion, in practice, page 118, section 9. Most observant Jews follow the lenient position. Steve, you want to read it for us?
In practice, most observant Jews follow the lenient position and carry in cities, relying on an eruv of the Zura HaPetach type. This leads to an interesting question, given that half of the poskim are stringent, believing that an eruv of the Zura HaPetach type is not sufficient in city with street wider than 16 amot, and that is irrelevant how many people pass through. How is it that most observant Jews follow the lenient position? After all, it is a case of doubt pertaining to a Torah law, where we are normally stringent. The simple answer is that in rare cases, when dealing with an issue in which it is very difficult to be stringent, sometimes the custom take hold to rely on a lenient opinion, even though there is possible Torah violation at stake. Furthermore, it is truly difficult to follow the stringent position here, as that would mean that no one could go out on Shabbat with anything in his pocket, even tissue and the like, which are sometimes necessary. Additionally, families would not be able to visit one another because one may not push a stroller in a Reshut HaRabim, and there would be no way to bring diapers, bottles, and so on, since there is no alternative, and given that half of the poskim are lenient, we can rely on the lenient position in this case.
Okay, we're not going to get into all the details here. There are other considerations that even though the streets are wide and there are lots of people on them, there's other reasons to consider that they're not a Reshut HaRabim on the Torah level. Some people say you have to have the main street that's completely straight. Our cities usually don't have that. So, right, there's intersections where, there's a T at the end of the road. There's other considerations. And in the footnote, he goes through 5 reasons, as you can see in footnote number 9. There are 5 reasons why many poskim hold that our big cities, even our big cities, are not a Reshut HaRabim by the Torah law. And if we combine all those reasons, then this is why the common practice is that the rabbi of the community, one of the first things he does is to build an eruv around the city, a tzurat hapetach, a form of eruv. But you will notice, maybe you've already noticed, have you ever seen anybody on Shabbat wearing their talit in the street? Why do they do that? Where did this custom come from? No, the opposite. They think there's no eruv. If there was an eruv, they would carry their talit in the bag and put it on when they're about to pray. They're wearing it because you're allowed to wear clothes. It's not considered carrying. So they put their talit on them and wear it to shul so they don't have to carry it. So there are many individuals who do not rely on the permission that this eruv, what we call an eruv, tzurat petach, they think it's not good enough. So even though many people do, and they bring babies and strollers, some rabbis don't allow their constituents of their community to bring babies to shul, because you can't carry. Even though there's an eruv, and say the eruv is not kosher. Becomes a little bit divisive sometimes. That's why I'm laughing. But you're allowed to be machmir. You're allowed to be machmir on yourself. It's maybe even a good thing, although he brings quite a strong case to say why it would be allowed. But you're always going to find there's some people who say, sure, you can carry your tissues in your pocket, your keys to the house, you can carry a sidur and a talit. And other people will say, I empty my pockets before Shabbat. I don't carry my talit. I'll borrow one when I get to shul. I will be careful not to carry anything in my pockets on Shabbat. Even though there are some rabbis who are lenient, and they went to great efforts, tremendous investment. Just for example, we're in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, where we're sitting, there's not one, but 2 or 3 eruvs put up by different rabbis. One is put up by the rabbinut, the chief rabbinate of the entire city. All of Jerusalem is surrounded by these lines, these poles with frames of doorways, and therefore many people, most rabbis say, you're allowed to carry in all of Jerusalem. You walk from your house in Kiryat Moshe all the way to the Kotel, carrying stuff in your pockets, and there's no problem. Other rabbis are more machmir, and they say, you cannot carry in Jerusalem. My neighborhood, where I live, Mea Sharim, has its own, not mine, but they say, has its own, we made a second eruv, within the bigger eruv of all of Jerusalem, only for our neighborhood. But if I go outside my neighborhood, I can't carry. Okay, because this within the smaller neighborhood, there's no thoroughfare, there's no 600,000 people. Maybe you can make smaller eruvim, but a bigger one. Jerusalem was a big metropolitan city. There is, what's the big street that goes down the center of Jerusalem? Yafo Street in most cities. Yafo Street is a big one. But so they don't rely on the eruv. Some people don't rely on the eruv unless they make their own private eruv, which for a smaller area where there's no problems. And, of course, there's some other details which they can argue about. So you're going to find in some communities, some people who carry and some people who don't carry. I'm not talking about weapons here. Doesn't matter if it's concealed carry or open. Regarding the laws of Shabbat, if it's carried in the normal way, it's prohibited unless you have a kosher eruv. Some families, you'll have 2 families really living right next to each other. One of them they do rely on the Eruv, and they will take the baby in the stroller and carry a purse and a talit and a sidur. And the next family, they don't rely on the Eruv. It's a personal decision. Everybody can decide whether they carry and rely on the Eruv or they don't. Of course, if you're in a place with no Eruv, there's no question. We all know the laws. If there's no Eruv, nobody's allowed to carry. You can't carry your Shidur and say, oh, back in Jerusalem I carried, so now that I'm in Stockholm I can carry. Those are two different things. Stockholm doesn't have an Eruv, for example. So we have to know those laws, even though you're usually in a community where it has an Eruv. You should be aware if there's no Eruv, you can't carry. So what can you do if you're in a place with no Eruv? So we said you can wear your clothing, and you can put on a talit on top of your clothing. Can you put on a coat? Yeah, coat. Anything that's part of the normal dress, you can wear, but you can't have anything in the pockets. So we're going to see some of the laws now. Yeah, go ahead.
Question is not just as for example, it make the mistake before there's something in the pocket, walking on the way, suddenly, there's something inside. What should I do?
Right. Good question. Good question. If you're outside the Eruv, we already said what you should not do is don't stop. Keep walking until you find the solution. Because the moment you stop, it's as if you're placing it down in the public thoroughfare. If you take it out of your public domain into the public thoroughfare, the private domain to the public, it's a problem. When you place it down, usually what you should do is look for the fourth type of space. Makom ptur. We said if you have a small space, like a pillar, which is lower than 80 centimeters and less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, that's 28 centimeters by 28 centimeters. You can find a rock, for example, a low rock. You can put it down on the rock. That's a makom ptur. So that you're allowed to put things down there. And then after Shabbat, you come pick it up. I've done that before. I was on a walk with my wife, and I have tissues in my pocket, and we look up and we see, the wire is back there. We went outside of the Eruv, so I'm not allowed to carry anymore. So I took the tissues out of my pocket and I put them on the rock. And then after Shabbat, if it's important, if it's not a tissue, if it's a sidur, if it's something important, you come back and get it after Shabbat. There's no problem. But hopefully nobody will take it. But you can't continue to carry if you don't have anywhere to leave it or something very valuable, then as long as you keep on walking, and it's a rabbinic area, if it's a Carmelite, or something valuable, you can rely on that you're not going to place it down. You keep walking until you enter a space where you feel that it's safe and you're able to put it down, and then you try to find a makom ptur to put it down on there. But there is room to be lenient. Keep walking. You don't really violate the halacha until you stop and place it somewhere. And so you can, if in case of great need, something that's very valuable, you don't want to just put it anywhere. You can keep walking until you find somewhere safe where you can put it, and then you put it down there, hopefully on a makom ptur, and then it's permitted. But it happens. What's a follow-up question? Yeah.
If the cash credit card,
Yeah, it's expensive. So that's what I was saying. So you can continue walking until you find a place that's safe to put it down, and then you can put it down there. That it's That's why it says in the halacha before Shabbat, check your pockets. Check your pockets before Shabbat. Yes, Hanan.
What about the house key?
House key is a problem. That's why most cities have an Eruv. But a house key can be a problem. You're not allowed to carry it. My grandmother, when she grew up in Toronto, they did not yet have an Eruv. When I grew up, there was already an Eruv. But Also, some communities, even in Toronto, till today, don't rely on the Eruv. Even though they've made a second one and a third one, there's a lot of issues regarding Eruvin. Anyways, so what do you do with the house key? That's the biggest problem. She had a pin, a beautiful piece of jewelry, and there's a clasp with a spring that, like this, clips on. So the back of the clip was made out of her house key. Her house key was part of her jewelry. And you're allowed to wear jewelry. We're going to learn the laws now that you're allowed to wear clothing and jewelry. And so she wore a special piece of a brooch with the house key on it so that she could lock her door and carry it on Shabbat. There's other solutions. Some people make a belt. So if you have a belt, you can't just hang it onto your belt. That's not considered to be. Let's say you have a belt. Okay, and then I'm going to try to draw a key, okay? How's that? Pretty good key? Okay? So you attach one end of the belt to the little hole, which most keys have, and you attach the other side of the belt to the other side of the key. That key now is part of the belt. A belt is a piece of clothing that you're allowed to wear. So you're allowed to wear the belt if the key is an integral part of it. You can't just have a regular belt with a nice little buckle, and then you attach the key. You put the key here. That doesn't do anything. That's just a belt hanging on. That key hanging onto your belt. That's not kosher. The key here is allowed because it's part of the belt. The belt is not functional without it, and so it becomes secondary to the belt. It becomes part of the belt essentially, and that's another solution we have for house keys. But you have to get creative. Sometimes people just hide the key underneath the flower pot next to the door. And if you have some kind of enclosure, an area, a lobby area, which has a covering itself, which has 4 walls, then it's a Reshut HaYachid, and you can bring the key inside the door afterwards. But it's a problem. It's a problem if there's no Eruv. So you have to, one of the first things you do when you go visit a friend or you travel is ahead of time. You have to look up. Let's say you say, oh, there's this beautiful museum I would love to visit in a small town in America, and it's only open on Shabbat. Okay, so you can stay there for Shabbat, go to the museum, assuming there's no. But wait, you have to ask the local Chabad rabbi: is there an Eruv? Can you carry? Can you take your money? Can you, not money, but Shabbat. Can you take your identity, your tissues, or your siddur, or your talit? Many communities, they have a website. You look up on the website, and you'll see pictures. Here's the Eruv. It goes from this street to that street. Sometimes the Jewish community is very small. It doesn't make an Eruv around the entire city. It makes an Eruv around where most of the Jews live. That's, again, another reason why many Jews live close to the synagogue. Also so they can walk there on Shabbat without driving the car, and also because the Eruv can be created around where the Jewish community is. In America, one of the rules are, if you want to convert, you have to move to inside the Eruv. For both reasons, you have to be part of the community. We talked about it yesterday. And if you live far, far away, A, you might have to drive, and B, you can't carry it. You can't push a stroller, you can't carry a baby. So if you want to join the community, you have to move into the Eruv. The Eruv is a small part of the town where most of the Jews live, and that's where they have an Eruv, not everywhere. But it's a tricky business. So, but don't worry, Sderot has an Eruv. Netivot, Ofakim, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, all these cities have an Eruv. If you go to some small out town, well, if there's a rabbi, for sure, probably, in most cases, there's going to be an Eruv, but you have to ask. It's a good thing to ask. It's a good thing to ask. Sometimes these strings, if there's a big wind, they get broken. And then the Eruv's not kosher. So after a snowstorm, for example, in Jerusalem, I remember last year, I think it was, there was a big snowstorm, or maybe 2 years ago. And at first, the rabbis make announcements and said, there's no Eruv in Jerusalem this week. Don't carry. People didn't know. They had been to class. How do I do? What do I do with my key? What do I do with my baby? They didn't know. You're not allowed to carry the baby out. You're not allowed to carry your siddur to shul. It was so strange to them. I think the next day, very quickly, the people volunteered, and they have a whole team. It's $1 million investment to make sure that these poles and wires are in the proper places all around the city. It's a big city of Jerusalem. There's an entire engineering team that makes sure. And then, at some point, I was a student studying to be a rabbi, and I needed some extra cash. So I got a side job. One of my side jobs was every Friday afternoon, I walked around the town where I lived to make sure that the string was still there, that the Eruv was still kosher, and if it fell down, if it was broken, I had to fix it. It's a job. It's a responsibility to keep the Eruv up. It's not just a one-time thing. You have to have upkeep. So sometimes you get an announcement that says, oh, you're in the town, but the Eruv is down. You're not allowed to carry anymore. You have to make sure that the enclosure stays. What do? What can you wear? Let's take a look at page 120, section 10. Morning, good morning. Okay, we'll continue the laws of Hotza'ah, B'ezrat Hashem, tomorrow. And we'll stop here.